You Shall Wander Forever, by Elton Gar. Morric threw the branch onto the roof of his mud hut. Kina stopped to look at the hut and said,
"We're moving on in a few days. What is the point of building this? I'm not going."
Morric said, then added,
"My mother is too weak to travel with the tribe."
So you decided to stay and watch her die, and then be alone?
Kina asked.
"The tribe will be back by the end of the season. When it returns, Mother will be strong enough to travel or she will have died. Either way, I will go with you."
Have you spoken to the elders?
"My mother is the eldest and I spoke to her."
Morric said, leaving out the part where she told him how bad of an idea it was.
How will you survive?
"The lake has fish, and the land along the river has more than enough plants for 2 people.
There is no flint here."
Kina said.
"I have enough and I will not need much. I won't be traveling, so I'll just keep the fire going."
Morric said. Kina didn't seem convinced. He understood. Everyone knew that if you stayed too long in one place, you would die. But Kina didn't speak of the curse. She only said,
I hope you do well.
You cannot stay,
Morric's mother said. This was their third argument, but he wasn't willing to let her die without trying to help.
"I can survive on my own for a few months."
Morric said.
It is not your ability I fear, but the curse. You will connect with the land. It is the curse that we must wander endlessly.
"If you were healthy enough to care for yourself, I would go. I won't leave you to die."
Morric said.
Then you must abide by my terms. You will spend only 1 night in 2 here. Each day you will travel a half a day's walk away, stay there and then return here for a single night.
He didn't like it. He could gather things on the trips while walking, but it would be harder and his mother would be alone most of the time. But his mother was stubborn. If he refused, she would stop eating and give him no choice. He followed that routine for the first month. By then he had been in one place 3 weeks longer than he ever had before. And something strange happened. He was standing waist deep in the river and knew there was a fish. He couldn't see it or feel it. He just sensed it. Reaching out to where his new sense told him, he grabbed the fish and threw it onto the shore. Morric followed it out of the water as he tried to understand what had happened. There was no way he could have known the fish was there. He was connecting to the land. But it didn't seem a curse. It seemed natural. It also seemed useful. He tried to sense other fish and failed. Perhaps this was the only nearby fish. It didn't matter. Along with the berries and fruit, it was more than enough food for the night's meal. So he cleaned the fish and tossed the parts they wouldn't eat into a basket to use for bait. While the fish cooked over the fire, Morric sat next to his mother. She had grown stronger, but as she looked up at him, her eyes widened and she said,
It's happening already.
"I could sense the fish without seeing it."
Morric said.
You must leave this area and not come back for at least a week.
His mother said.
"You must feel it too. You haven't left."
Morric said.
All the elders feel the world, but because we travel our whole lives, it is spread out. A vague sense that helps us find water and good places to hunt. I am near death, and so death brought about by connecting to a single place is a gift. I will feel the land, the animals, even the sky, then I will become part of it.
"But why would it kill you?"
Morric asked.
Why does anyone die? It is the curse of this world. You must wander forever or you will die.
Morric had known those words his entire life and had never questioned them. But now he wondered if that curse was wrong.
"But everyone who stops is dying. It's no surprise they die."
Morric said.
It is possible that the curse is not what we believe it to be.
His mother said.
"Then I'm not going. And it's not just because you'll die if I leave. I want to know what happens when I connect to the land."
His mother nodded, and together they had a meal of fish and berries. Without the need to travel most of every day, the connection grew. Sensing animals seemed the easiest, and within a week he no longer needed to check his snares and traps. He could feel it when an animal had been caught. And he could find fish so easily, he didn't bother visiting the river until just before the meal. Just as important, he could sense the bear that lived in a cave nearby and could avoid it. With the connection making gathering food easier, Morric had more time. At first, he used that time to make his mother more comfortable. He piled up dirt in one corner of the small hut, and then moved her bed on it so she no longer had to work so hard to get out of the bed. And he gathered fur to make new clothing, and to cover the entrance to their hut. Once he had made the hut more comfortable, Morric moved on to gathering supplies. At first, he simply built up the pile of firewood. He filled a half-dozen baskets of dried meat. Using his connection, he even found a cache of flint buried nearby. He had enough flint for himself, but the bag and flint reminded him of the tribe. They usually had to trade for flint, but there was enough here for several years. That wasn't the only thing they could trade. He still planned to rejoin the tribe, so why not prepare things that would be useful? He used his growing connection to find trees with branches that would make good spears, and collected the material to make baskets that his mother would spend her days weaving together. Soon he ran out of safe, dry places to store everything, so he built a second hut. Without the rest of the tribe to help, it took longer. But he had time, and before the roof had been finished, he filled it with dried food and handmade tools. All the while he waited to get sick, or perhaps to just fall over dead. But even though he could sense the world better and further every day, he felt as good as ever, and his mother was getting stronger. By the time the tribe returned, his senses touched them a half a day's walk away. It was odd, feeling so many people. And as neared his camp, the sense became stronger. At first it was a vague impression, but by the time he walked out from his cabin to meet them, he could feel the blister on Baven's left foot, and he knew Neomon was an inch taller than when they left. And Kenna was pregnant. A child ran up to him as they approached, and Morric picked her up and carried her back to the rest of them. They spent most of the return telling Morric stories from the last months. They had traded with 4 other tribes. 3 were of the common trades. One type of food for another, but they had met one tribe who had traded with another for fishhooks, and the tribe now had almost 100 bone hooks. Morric smiled as they told him about the haul. He had little doubt that the fishhooks were better than the ones he had carved, but he had made almost twice as many. He didn't tell them anything about it. The young girl in his hand saw his camp first. The 2 completed huts were in the middle, but he had begun 2 more. Neither had roofs yet, but they all had circles of stone piled around a small hole at their center, and enough firewood for everyone to use as much as they wanted. The kids ran around the camp exploring while everyone else found places to relax. Morric carried fire to each of the huts, allowing them to start their fires faster and easier than most nights. That night he shared his food. They had smoked fish wrapped in leaves and dried fruit. Everyone was impressed except the elders. They just watched him without speaking, their wrinkled faces hiding all emotion. For them, it was easy to understand how he had gathered the supplies. He had become an abomination and a danger to the entire tribe. They saw the huts as an invitation for more people to stay, and they understood better than most the draw of remaining here. A draw that would become more tempting if they discovered the abilities they could gain from staying. But Morric didn't plan to fight the elders to convince them to stay. He respected them too much for that. He had never built the huts with the assumption the tribe would stay. He had built them so he had his own place to stay and to store the things he made. Only once they had arrived had that plan changed. His mother was the best midwife in the tribe, and traveling was never easy for a pregnant woman, so he would convince Kina to stay just long enough for the baby to be born. The entire tribe stayed almost a week. They helped him put roofs on the huts and picked out supplies from the things that Morric had made, and left a few things behind that he might find useful, along with a large cache of things he could turn into future supplies. It wasn't hard to convince Kina to stay. She picked out one of the 2 recently finished huts and moved in along with Iric, the baby's father. With 2 more people, things went well. Most days Kina and his mother sat next to the river and turned their supplies into more useful crafts, while Morric and Iric gathered food or other things of value. And with a second person, Morric could hunt some more elusive animals. The most difficult part was hiding his connection to the land. Then one evening while they were eating a dinner of eggs that Iric had gathered, he said,
"Have you noticed anything strange about this place? This afternoon I knew where a nest was without seeing it."
You know the curse. Anyone who stays in one place too long becomes connected to it. But we were wrong. We believed it would kill the person, but we have not gotten weaker, we are in fact stronger.
Morric's mother said.
But I'm not feeling any different.
Kina said.
Perhaps each person is different.
Morric said.
It is the child you carry. Women often spend months in one place while pregnant, and I have never heard of one becoming connected to a place. You are instead connected to the child.
Morric's mother said. With their secret out, Morric no longer had to hide his abilities. Hunting was the most useful. He could spook animals so they ran towards Iric, who sensed them coming and could spear them. They also understood why Morric and his mother planned to stay, even though she was healthy enough to keep up with the tribe. Over the next months, as Kina grew in her pregnancy, Morric and Iric gathered mud and straw, creating a circular wall enclosing the 4 huts and a field where they could build several more. When the baby came, the building of the wall and gathering of supplies became a lower priority. Kina and Morric's mother spent much more time watching the baby than crafting, while the 2 men stayed near the camp. The tribe returned when the baby was 3 months old. They naturally expected everyone to return to traveling, though there seemed to be some disagreement in the tribe. The elders insisted they must return to the tribe, but younger men carried bags of things to leave in the huts. There was fur, bone, stone, and other valuable crafting tools, but there were also smaller bags full of things they had traded for. That was when Morric made his pitch to the tribe. He still wasn't willing to admit he was connected to the land. Instead, he suggested they send other tribes here to exchange goods rather than in the chance meetings of wandering tribes. There was some small chance a tribe might try to steal from them, but Morric could sense people a day's walk away, so they could never be surprised, and their wall was now tall and thick enough it would be difficult to attack them. The problem was the elders, and not just the elders of his own tribe. The elders of the other tribes would see the dangers that Morric's idea had to their tribes. But since he wasn't asking them to do anything but trade and tell people they were here, and because his mother was still the eldest member of the tribe, they didn't intervene. Things went almost back to normal. The baby was healthy but quiet, and there was plenty of material, so they rarely had to leave their small walled enclosure. And only a few weeks later, another tribe arrived. They were smaller than Morric's tribe, only about 15 people. But unlike his tribe, they were here to trade. They agreed to supply food for use of the huts, and several of the men helped to build a 5th hut. But the most valuable thing they did was agree to trade furs for a few spears, some fishhooks, and 3 hand axes. Finally, they agreed to tell any tribes they met of this place, understanding that the more tribes that traded here, the more likely that Morric would have useful things to trade with them. At first it was slow. There were months when no tribes visited, and others where several visited. But by the time baby Iric was walking, it had changed. There were at least 15 tribes who visited regularly, bringing useful supplies. Because of the difficulty of hauling things, Morric usually got the better value out of those trades. It was Kina who first recognized baby Iric's connection to the land. There was no single moment that proved conclusively Iric could sense the world around him, but there were hundreds of small things. He would look up and smile before his father entered the room, and could find his mother no matter where she went. They had expected the connection, and Morric thought it was a good thing. Being born and living in the same place meant the connection would never seem strange to him. But then other things happened. One day while they were by the river, 2 fish swam onto the ground in front of Iric. It was odd. Morric tried to convince a fish to move onto shore, but nothing happened. From then on, they saw many strange ways the child interacted with the world was easy to see. Bugs never landed on him. Birds would bring him small things and the rabbits would play with him. If that was all, then Morric would have just assumed he was stronger than the rest of them. But he still hadn't spoken. He rarely even made baby noises. He listened to the adults with interest but didn't mimic them. Iric didn't need to speak. He could communicate with fish, rabbits, and birds and make them do as he wanted without words, so why attempt to understand the strange ones whose minds he couldn't control?
I don't think he sees us that way. We are still his family,
Morric's mother said, when he explained his theory.
Perhaps, but my connection with the land feels more real than the connection with other people. I can only guess what people are thinking or will do,
Morric said. But the silent child was family, and there was nothing to be done. He was healthy and smart. And eventually, he spoke in his own way. He projecting thoughts into their minds. By the time it was clear that was what he was doing, Morric suspected he had been doing it for some time. This time seemed urgent. All 4 adults had a vision. It was of a tribe almost twice the size of his own, and they were coming towards the huts. But more than that, they carried weapons designed to fight people, not animals. This tribe was coming to rob them. They had always known it was possible. The plan was to prove people would die if they attacked, and instead giving them food and supplies to leave. It might encourage more to do the same, but it would keep them alive. But Iric didn't know the plan. Or he didn't like it because the next day, an enormous bear walked into the center of the camp and laid down next to the toddler. Iric patted the bear, then walked over to the river, and a large fish flopped out of the water in front of him. Iric carried the fish over to the bear. Morric thought he understood. Tribes sometimes hunted bears, but even a planned bear hunt was often deadly. This bear was bigger than most, and its appearance should be enough to dissuade ever a large group from attacking. The enemy tribe arrived that night. The woman carried torches and the men spears. A single large man with several scars and a spear with a flint head approached the gate. It was just wide enough for a single person to step through. As he did, he watched the bear.
You should go,
Morric said, but there was something in the way the man moved that suggested he would not.
This place is an abomination. Our elders warned it must be ripped down and forgotten before it leads others astray.
Morric wasn't sure if it was the bear or Iric in charge, but it stood on its back legs and roared. The man lifted his spear towards the bear, and in response it hit him with a single massive swing. It then picked the man up by the neck and carried him over to where it had been resting and laid down. Morric had to look away as the bear ate. But it wasn't just seeing the death. Morric had seen animals kill people before. This was different because he knew Iric was connected to that bear. And there would be more death because this wasn't about stealing supplies. It was about the curse. The enemy didn't attack that night, though they all sat up and waited. And it wasn't the raiders that broke the eerie silence. It was the howling of wolves. 2 hours later, the attack, such as it was over. The bear stood just inside the small gap in the fence with almost a dozen men dead in front of him, and a dozen minor cuts. Outside of the fence was carnage that made Morric ill. Wolves rarely attacked people in groups, but this pack had attacked. They had appeared from the trees attacking in pairs, so that when a man turned to face one wolf, the other would attack the back of their legs. And the wolves didn't kill people. They hobbled them. And once the attacking tribe understood they couldn't win and fled, wolves took who was left. Morric said nothing. He waited until he was alone in the hut with his mother, and said,
I think I understand the curse.
His mother nodded and said,
He is our family. We would never hurt him.
Morric almost said something about how it might be necessary, then he understood. Iric was family, but he also knew what they were thinking and saying, so they couldn't speak freely unless they could fight the bear. The next days, Morric tried not to think about his plan. He didn't know how well the child could understand, but he knew the bear would protect Iric. Over the next few weeks, things went almost back to normal. They cleaned away the corpses, and the blood was washed away by a rainstorm, but the bear stayed by Iric's side. Morric tried to ignore it until he felt a small push on his emotions. He pushed back, though he didn't know how, and he thought he understood. Iric had tried to do to him what he had done with the wolves and the bears. The child was growing stronger, or at least more aware of what he could do. Morric understood the curse and the reason it was safe for the elderly to stay in one place, but not anyone else. Somehow the connection to Iric had been magnified because he had always been here. Perhaps it had been created by the connection between him and his mother while she was pregnant. The reasons didn't matter. What mattered was that he was dangerous. Morric waited until he was hunting with Hermic. Normally they hunted near the camp, but this time they kept walking until they passed the edge of the area where Morric could sense the world clearly. He didn't know the range of Iric's ability, but he had to do something, and at least this far out he might not know as much.
We have to leave,
Morric said.
You're worried about Iric.
Hermic said.
I'm worried about that bear.
If we leave the area, Iric won't have his abilities. He might even talk to us.
Hermic said.
You don't understand. We can't take him with us. I doubt he'd let us.
Morric said.
You want me to abandon my son?
Hermic said.
He tried to control me yesterday, and he's getting stronger every day. Once he can, we won't want to leave anymore.
Morric said.
We won't abandon our child.
Hermic said. And Morric knew it was true.
My mother will have to stay. She won't survive long while traveling.
Morric said, but it was obvious from the look of Hermic that it didn't matter, and Morric wondered if perhaps it was too late. How would he know if Iric could already control the others? Morric was the strongest. He had been there longer than Kenna and Hemric, and his mother had never grown as strong as any of them. He considered that for several minutes and then said,
Will I be allowed to leave?
Of course.
Hermic said. The next morning Morric packed as much dried meat into a pack as he could carry, said goodbye to his mother, and left. He wanted to ask her to come, to find some other quiet place where they could live, but he knew that time was past. He likely could have found his tribe easily enough, but that wasn't where he went. He instead searched out the tribe that had attacked them. As he traveled away from the small patch of land he had lived on for the last years, his ability to sense the world faded. From time to time he would see smoke and approach a tribe. Almost no one would send away a healthy male, especially one who carried extra food. And with each tribe, he got a better idea where the tribe that attacked him would be. When he finally found them, he had no doubts. Most of the men had scars and others limped. There were also nearly twice as many women as men. The 3 elders stood and watched him as he entered the camp. He sat down his spear at the edge of the camp and approached them unarmed. As he reached them, an old man with gray hair and drooping eyebrows said,
"We know who you are."
And I wish to learn from you. Can you tell me about the curse?
Morric said,
"In our tribe there are legends passed down of a garden where the first people lived. It was a peaceful place, but a demon came and tricked them into rebelling against God. They were given a curse that would make them wander forever because those who did not would become demons."
And you believe that story?
I believe it is true in the same way that the stories of the lands are true. Each teaches us something valuable about how to survive, and whether or not it happened is less important. I think you're here because it has truth in it.
I don't know if Iric is a demon. I think he's just a child with a lot of power and very little connection to people. But I'm not sure he can become more than that. He'll take control of people who go near him, use them the same way he used the bear. That means he'll never understand what it's like to know free people. And without a tribe, he'll never have children. And if he somehow had them, they'd be as dangerous as he was. So his line will die out, and we'll keep wandering and surviving and passing along the warning until perhaps someday we can break the curse.
And what will you do?
I will help your tribe. I am strong and uninjured. I am also in part responsible for the damage done. And I will teach as many as I can of the truth of the curse. We must wander forever.
Author's note.
There is a massive amount of time that humans have been alive before recorded history. I grew up being taught that the Earth was about 6,000 years old. As I began to understand that humans were on Earth for 300,000 years before the beginning of recorded history, it was hard to get my head around. What that means is that the part of human history that we know is about 3% of unrecorded human history. And while the advancement in technology means that it is likely that far more has happened in that 3% than in any other similar section of time, it's more than enough time for entire civilizations to rise and fall. It's the time period that Conan the Barbarian is set in, and there have been a few other similar stories. This story tries to imagine that time period. What I added was a curse. It's meant to be evocative of the curse of Cain, to explain how it took hundreds of thousands of years before humans settled. Not something that needed explained, but I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. If you did, then consider some of my other work. You can get a free short story every week by joining my newsletter at www.ansci-fi.com and following the link that reads Free Book. Or you can get access to all of the short stories at any patron level. Elton Gar.